Welcome back to the last session of day one. So we were due to start a few minutes past. So this session will be looking at youth and employment services, and I'd like to invite the session chair, Sergio Falange, to come through. And then there's a lady who left her handbag by the break area. So I have a brown handbag. If it's yours, you can get it from me. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. In my country, I'm from Mozambique. We used to say boa tarde. So I hope you are back with me. So in this session, we'll talk about youth. So I would like to invite everyone to join for this session number 7. That will talk about the youth and the employment service. And for that, I will invite 2 speakers that will present in this session. But let me first give you a brief summary about the session because of the other one that are in the other side. So when we're talking about the youth and employment service, we know that this one become critical because of the youth who are not in employment also do not receive any form of social protection. So the youth in Africa presents a myriad of concern that this includes potential for cyber conflicts resulting from youth unemployment, poverty, health concern, and lack of education opportunity. So in this session, we will discuss this aspect and how countries are using social protection to assist the youth to participate in labor markets. So, as I said, I will invite 2 speakers to present and discuss with us. The first one will be Dr. Hannah Dawson. So Dr. Hannah is a senior research at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. Her research examined the social, economic, and political implications of the rise of unemployment and precarious work, with a focus on South Africa, shaping social policy and the way the future of work is being imagined and transformed. So I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Hannah. I know that she's online. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. And I'm sorry I can't be with you all in person, but really nice to be here in this way. The last time I was at a SASPEN conference or workshop I was trying to remember the year. It was in Lilongwe, which was wonderful. I have very good memories from that time. I think maybe 2014. So I'm going to just quickly see if I can share my screen. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, I see.
Okay. Perfect. I'm using 2 computers here, so bear with me. So I know that, as Sergio, thanks for the introduction. The session is widely on youth and employment services, and there's lots to be said on the bigger policy questions that are really about youth, questions of employment and social protection. But really what I want to do today is share some new research, which is tied to some of these questions. But I'm only going to come to the policy debates and questions right at the end. So I titled it, Wanting Jobs, Not Grants, to be provocative, Youth Unemployment and the Moral Charge of Labor. And I'm just going to get straight into it. So the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa, and I'm sure many of you have been following some of the debates here, if not all of you, that really we've seen renewed calls for basic income in South Africa. And in response to widespread job losses produced by the COVID-19 pandemic, the South African government over the last year or more now has drastically expanded the social protections, primarily through the expansion of existing social grants, through top-ups of various forms, but for often quite short periods of time. And really the most significant intervention has been the creation of a new COVID-19 grant. And this grant was aimed at unemployed people who receive no other social grant in the South African social security system, and who also were not eligible for unemployment insurance. So really those with no other income or income support. And what is most significant about this intervention was that it really was the first time unemployed working-aged adults, so those between 18 and 59, were included within South Africa's social grant system. And this is something that the post-apartheid government has been actively resisting for some time, despite, there were significant debates around basic income in the early 2000s, but that policy didn't come to fruition. Rather, the child support grant was expanded. So all to say, this is not the first time that South Africans are talking with a lot of kind of urgency about basic income. We've been here before. But nonetheless, the introduction of the COVID-19 grant has generated a lot of excitement amongst policymakers, but also amongst civil society around this. But what I and a colleague felt is that very often the views, a lot of the research on social protection and basic income in South Africa often very quickly becomes about modeling to determine its affordability, or becomes, so very quickly the research gets kind of captured by design, very important questions of policy design, instead of research that really asks people their perceptions and views about more expansive social protection. So this paper is really trying to answer two questions. One is, what are the views of ordinary South Africans and young people in particular about the COVID-19 grant and basic income more generally? And why I think that's important is because young people in South Africa bear the greatest burden of unemployment, and predominantly unemployment, but also it's young people that stand to benefit quite significantly from more expansive social protection and some kind of basic income support more generally. So really today, I want to just share some findings from a survey that my colleague Liz Fuchsman and I conducted with the help of two research assistants in a community called Jeppiestown, which is in inner city Johannesburg. So actually not so far from where you are in Rosebank. So it was predominantly low income inner city residents. And the survey was really focused on asking three key questions. The one was people's perceptions about the introduction of the COVID grant. The second one was about, well, really, I'm only going to focus on the two main ones today. So their views about the COVID grant and their support for that becoming a more permanent measure. So just the survey respondents we spoke to, there was not quite a split, equal split between men and women. It was 56% men and 44% women. And about 80% of the respondents were under 35 years, so classified as youth in the South African context. And there you see on the slide when we did the survey in 2020 last year in quite a severe hard lockdown, we asked what their primary source of support was, and you can see there what it was. So kind of self-employment and financial support from family and friends was the most important one. And one other kind of maybe important background factor was that at the time we did the survey, only about half of our respondents had applied for the COVID grant, and only 30% had actually received the grant. So the survey respondents were a combination of people who'd applied and who hadn't, and those who'd received it or hadn't. Of course, that changed over time. So there's kind of three key areas I want to give you a quick kind of summary of the data. So one of the big questions we asked was around support. The question we asked was, do you support the government's decision to introduce a new COVID-19 grant? And the overwhelming majority of people, 83% of our respondents, said that they support the grant, with only a minority, 15%, not supporting it. And the two most common reasons given for why they support the new grant were, one, the high levels of unemployment, which of course were there before lockdown and the pandemic, but were exacerbated. And secondly, really just the real need for income to buy basic necessities, such as food and toiletries, as well as people often referring to the need to look after their families. So you can see two of the quotes there, people talking about the fact that they need money because they're no longer working, and the fact that, the grant meant that at least not every night you were going to bed with kind of nothing in your stomach. So a number of the respondents noted that despite the grant being a small amount, it is, as many said, it's better than nothing. Another person we spoke to said that even though 350 is not enough, but for the less fortunate, it helps. Other reasons given for supporting the COVID-19 grant were tied to the high levels of inequality in South Africa, and also very interestingly that I believe that kind of social grants helped support informal enterprises. And another one being that a number of people spoke about that having even just a small amount of money reduced the burden on family members who had a waged income. I guess a lot of these are quite obvious. Now, even only 15% of people said they didn't support the introduction of the COVID grant, so it was a real minority. But I think the reasons they gave for not supporting it are equally insightful, even though it really was a minority. So the most common reason was a strong preference for jobs over grants. And many of these respondents phrased the grants as a waste of money and felt that the government should rather spend the money on creating jobs or building houses rather than giving people cash. And we were very struck by the kind of sophistication of the answers we got to those who were not in support, often very robust answers. And the other two reflect the kinds of things you see being debated publicly. So a number of people spoke about concerns about the financial cost and South Africa's high debt to GDP ratio, and others also concerned about the kind of financial sustainability of the grant over the long term. And lastly, were also concerns around patronage and vote buying. So 350 Rand, of course, is extremely low, a low amount. It's less than the child support grant. So we also asked questions around how much people thought the grant should be. And again, the overwhelming majority thought that 350 was not enough. And when we asked how much it should be, we got answers that ranged between 500 Rand to 1,000 Rand, and in a few cases over 1,000 Rand. I have more to say about that, but I want to make sure I don't run out of time at the end. So so we asked about support, and then the second key area we asked about was around permanency. So we asked in the survey, do you think that the South African government should introduce a permanent, we called it an unemployment grant, not a basic income grant. And if you have questions about why we did that, you can ask at the end maybe. So we asked, would you support the government introducing an unemployment grant for all South Africans aged 18 to 59? And close to 3/4, 74% of our respondents answered yes to the question. And when we asked what amount they thought a permanent unemployment grant should be set at, the most common answer was 1,860 Rand, which is slightly above the upper bound poverty line of 1,268. And this was followed by 3,500 Rand, which is actually the national minimum wage. And lastly, by 440 Rand, which is the amount of the child support grant. Now, we also asked people to justify. So there was a set of options, and then we asked them to justify why they thought it should be a certain amount. And that also was quite interesting, but because what it showed was differences between those who see an unemployment grant as providing minimal income for basic necessities. So people would say, for example, if they said 440 Rand, they would say, well, it should just be enough for the basics. And then other people who said, for example, 3,500 Rand would say, no, that a grant should be adequate to cover a wider set of needs, including rent, including helping send the children to go to school, transport costs, etc. And then the other key area, the third one I wanted to focus on, was around preferences. And this is where it gets quite interesting. So one of the final questions—
Only 3 minutes.
Okay. One of the final questions we asked was, what one thing should the government provide after lockdown to help South Africa recover? And we asked the question as a zero-sum game, precisely because we wanted to analyze the relationship between these very high levels of support for the COVID grant and for the introduction of a permanent unemployment grant, and to see if this support shifted if we forced respondents to pick one of 5 options from a list of policy options to help. And we framed it, if the government can only do one thing to help, South Africa and individuals recover from the pandemic, what of these 5 should the government prioritize? And the 5 options were government work programs, business funding, job or business training, unemployment grants, and food parcels. And this is where what was very striking is that even though we had 83% and 74%, so the large majority of people supporting basic income, when the question was asked as a set of policy priorities, only 6% listed unemployment grants as their number 1 policy choice. So government work programs, business funding and training, kind of entrepreneurial interventions came up incredibly high. So the summary is in the most simple terms, kind of support for an unemployment grant doesn't necessarily mean that it's a preference. And just to kind of conclude, so, the key question is kind of, and this is what myself and my colleague have been trying to make sense of, how do we make sense of this kind of contradiction between high levels of support, but then it's not viewed as a priority when it's listed as a set of policy priorities. And really how we've come to understand that is, well, the first thing to say is that all of these policy options already exist in South Africa. We have a public works program. There's various support for small businesses, and many of them were part of the COVID relief. But, people's preference for government interventions, such as the public works program or entrepreneurial training, shows what we're calling a very clear preference pattern tied to a set of binaries, which I've just put on the slide there. So jobs and entrepreneurship are kind of if you listen to how people are talking about these things, are tied to ideas of independence, security, mobility, and stability. So, you know, a kind of job is viewed as offering kind of longer term possibilities. Whereas an unemployment grant, even if it's at a decent level, is still tied with kind of dependence, temporariness, and kind of short-term survival. So just quickly, lastly, to conclude, the last thing I just wanted to say is that I think it's too simple to read these findings as, you know, people prefer jobs over grants, but rather it shows that waged work and entrepreneurship still plays, despite so many young people not having wage jobs, it's still a huge factor in their kind of imaginations of what a good life looks like and the kinds of lives that they want to live. And so I'm not suggesting that, you know, these views should direct social policy. I'm a huge advocate myself of basic income, of more expansive social protection. And yet I think it's really important that we understand some of these hesitations and attachments because, yeah, I think they're important to gaining the support of those who would benefit the most. And lastly, I think they point to the need in South Africa to be connecting the dots more between the talk of more expansive social protection with other interventions around youth unemployment and other kinds of innovations that are taking place in the public employment space. So thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anna. You owe me 1.5 minutes. And now we'll move to the next speaker. Is Dr. Isaac Kabelenga. Isaac Kabelenga is a PhD, lecturer for postgraduate and undergraduate students at the University of Zambia, and the senior research and social protection champions for Zambia and Africa, and Zambia Center for Poverty Reduction and Research Limited. Isaac specializes in social policy, social protection, and social work. Please, Dr. Isaac, can you join the floor? You have 15 minutes. Please stick to the time.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all the conference attendees.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
So I'm
Good afternoon.
speaking from Lusaka, Zambia. My presentation focuses on exploratory study of social protection programs targeted towards youth unemployment in Zambia. So just as a recap of what I'm going to present, unfortunately, my PowerPoint is not moving. Kindly give me a few minutes, please. Yeah, sorry, it's not moving. Let me present. I have with me the presentation.
Yes,
So
please.
I'll quickly talk about the format for this presentation. I'll talk about the background and motivation for this study, the theoretical framework and methodology, the findings, and the policy implications. So to begin with, in social protection discourses, there are few studies that focus on social protection interventions that are targeted towards youth unemployment, especially in Africa. And because of this limitation, there is, I think, the global scientific knowledge is also limited because there are few studies that are focused on social protection that is being targeted towards youth unemployment. Now, as a way of trying to reduce this gap in global scientific knowledge, I thought that focusing on this study will be able to address this gap and consequently broaden the scope of global scientific knowledge on social protection. And another important thing also to understand is that Zambia is among the countries in sub-Saharan Africa which has got the highest rates of the youth unemployment, especially those in the bracket of 15 to 34 years of age. It is estimated that youth unemployment in Zambia stands at 60%. Other studies, they say it is 27%, and others, they indicate that it's around 80%. So it is not clear about the actual statistics of youth unemployment in Zambia. And then in terms of methodology, this study actually reviewed available literature and also conducted 4 qualitative interviews with the government of Zambia officers who implement social protection. And then the data was analyzed using content analysis and thematic analysis. And in order to make the data analytical, the concept of power was used as an analytical tool. In terms of the findings, this study has established 3 major forms of social protection interventions that are being used by the government of Zambia to address the problem of youth unemployment. And these are Youth Empowerment Fund. Okay, so this Youth Empowerment Fund, it involves the government of Zambia giving cash or money to unemployed youths, either to pay as school fees or to use as capital for their own businesses. For example, the findings established, the study established that in July 2020, $6 million was released to support aquaculture youth empowerment initiative. And its group of youth received about 2 million to 12 million Zambian kwacha. And that is a reasonable amount of money in the Zambian context. And that money is meant to enable the youths to start their own business. So in so doing, it is hoped that youths will be able to create employment for themselves and for others. The study has also established that another form of social protection which is being introduced by the government of Zambia is the skills training form of social protection. So in this form of social protection, the unemployed youths are given survival skills. So they are being trained in different livelihood skills, such as tailoring, carpentry, bricklaying, home management, electrical, mechanics, which also include issues like, for example, home management. And the study established that, for example, in 2018, 2019, over 2,000 youths were employed with skills training. And that was meant to enable them to have the skill which they can use either to find employment in the formal labor market or to employ themselves. And then the study has also established another form of social protection, which is the startup kits. So in this form of social protection, the unemployed youths, they are being given the startup kits, which they are supposed to use to venture into the businesses. For example, in 2018 and 2019, the study established that 1,000 youths cooperatives comprising of 10 to 12 members in each group, they actually received or they were empowered with cargo motorized tricycles. So this empowerment is enabling the youths to transport cargo for different businessmen and women in town, and in turn the youths, they are being paid for that. And as a result, youths are being employed and they are also employing others. And now when we look at all the 3 forms of social protection interventions that this study has established, it is evident that these forms of social protection are aimed at empowering unemployed youths with livelihood skills. So the skills empower beneficiaries with theoretical and practical business skills and business capital for either finding formal employment or creating employment for themselves. So in so doing, youth unemployment can be reduced. In global social protection discourses, this form of social protection is called empowerment and transformative social protection. By that, it means that it is a form of social protection which is aimed at empowering and transforming the mind of the unemployed youths so that they begin to create employment for themselves and for others, and thus helping in reducing unemployment. Although this study did not evaluate the actual impact that these 3 forms of social protection had on reducing unemployment among the beneficiaries, in conclusion, the study concludes that government of Zambia has adopted empowering and transformative social protection interventions as strategies for reducing youth unemployment. From the study, we can also deduce that the interventions have potential to help in reducing youth unemployment. This is because they give mental and economic power to unemployed youths to create employment for themselves and for other unemployed people, and thus enabling them to help others even in joining the labor market. So what we can deduce from the findings in terms of policy implications, which in my own thinking can be adopted by any country, whether in global north or in global south, is that one possible strategy to consider when thinking about reducing youth unemployment is to use empowering and transformative social protection interventions. The study also concludes that social protection targeted towards youth unemployment has multiple benefits and at multiple level, which is at macro level, meso level, and macro level. This is because it can reduce the problem of unemployment at the individual level, at organization level, at community level, and at national level. And there are many benefits which accrue from these kind of interventions, and the benefits do not just benefit directly the beneficiaries, but also the nation at large and the communities in which they live, they also benefit. Thus, this study also concludes that social protection is a development policy, in the sense that if it is well organized, it can help the unemployed youth and the whole community and the larger nation also to develop. And because of this, this study also advocates that social protection is a new international agenda for action, and therefore, in many African countries which are characterized with high levels of unemployment, they should consider introducing youths for unemployed youths as tools for reducing unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. I think that the floor, the hands is because you already paid the minutes that Dr. Hannah's take to me. So now I will take this discussion to the floor. We had here two interventions from two different speakers presenting the Youth and Employment Service. So I don't know if we have hands, any questions? So I have two from this side. So we can start, please.
Okay, thank you to our presenters. My question is directed to Dr. Isaac, my namesake. I think you mentioned in your presentation that the youth unemployment statistics is not, there's a debate as to, you know, what is the percentage of unemployed youth. I'm thinking, you know, getting it from other, you know, other platforms in terms of social protection where governments make it, you know, make a deliberate move to define certain groups of people in the way that they want, probably for certain reasons. In my presentation, when I was looking at Botswana, I mentioned that Botswana have a narrow definition of what they call offense, mostly because they want to limit the number of children who are supported by the government. That's so I want to understand what is happening in Zambia. Is it a deliberate move by the government? So what is the status that you are using to say this is the number of unemployed unemployed youth in Zambia? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another one, Gift. And then Taco.
Thanks, Chair. To Hannah, I think it's interesting that youth are saying they want jobs. And perhaps social protection should be a solution to that. And I would ask, to what extent can expanded public works programs be a solution to this youth unemployment in South Africa. Then to Isaac, I hear you talking about skill building. It got me wondering to say, will it help them to find employment, or we will have skilled youth who still don't have employment? Because employment is just elusive. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's close the round with Taco.
Thank you so much. Hi, Hannah, and my question is directed to you. Well, I think the one thing that you mentioned was that that I would like you to clarify is on the issue around why you referred it to as an unemployment grant, firstly. And also, I think one of the things that from your research that I kind of picked up is that obviously a whole lot of youth, they prefer jobs than grants, obviously. I think it's around the stigma that's associated with grants. I think if you recall the workshop in Lilongwe, I think there was something around targeting, and the community had to pick who was poor and was not. And there was one old man who refused to actually take a grant because they didn't consider themselves as poor, but they were able-bodied, but they didn't just have the means to do that. So I think, is it an issue around the stigma that probably would find people now resorting to other alternatives? And should we not then start looking at social protection, not just as a grant itself, but obviously something that is, as we basic income grant supporters, I would like to say a human rights-based approach to social welfare, to consider it as a right more than a charity or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with Dr. Hannah.
Thanks. Both to a gift and to Taku, who I both know. So I'm just, feeling like I wish I was in the room. But so thanks to both of them for those questions. And so first to Gift's question. I mean, yes, if we think about social protection in the expansive way, that public works programs are part of social protection. Although I'm not always sure, like, for example, in the South African context, it seems sometimes that's how it's understood and viewed. And then at other times they kind of exist within different departmental logic. So there's the kind of, in theory, how we might think about public works programs as part of social protection, and then how they are kind of operationalized within the current state apparatus. So, at the moment, I'm trying to follow these things quite closely at the moment, but there is talk currently of kind of reinvigorating the public works program in some new ways. And there's a lot of activity happening within the presidency around the youth employment initiative and stimulus, where there's now a number of kind of policy innovations happening, which are all framed around the kind of social economy, which it's very interesting. It's basically around providing young people with part-time work in the communities in which they live in. And there's a lot about the policy that seems very kind of laudable, but it seems to be somewhat disconnected from conversations that are also happening very actively in Treasury and in the Department of Social Development around expanding income support to people aged 18 to 59. So I must say, I do think that public works programs are part of the solution, that we need a series of interventions, that, we can't think about one thing or put them up against each other as clear-cut options. So I do think there's a space for EPWC, the Community Works Program, and the new kinds of innovations which are currently being piloted. But all the research I've read on the EPWP program shows that it's not very efficient or effective in just the huge cost. I mean, 50% of the budgets go towards administrating those projects and get lost to middlemen, kind of middle companies that basically manage and operate these. So I think in the context, so, you know, what you can do with a piece of a budget, if you give money directly to people, seems far more expansive and full of possibilities than a much smaller number of people getting. A lot of the research shows that a lot of young people don't actually want to do that work. It's primarily taken up by slightly older workers, and it's very skewed towards women, and there are lots of reasons for that. So I think it's part of the solution, but I'm definitely of the view that if we had to make a stark choice, we should rather be giving cash transfers to the group, which is currently absent. But then this is where the question, and now there's lots of talk about this, how do you think about that, as Taku was referring to, not as a kind of a grant, but as an investment into local economies, as a way which is connected. You know, a lot of the way in which it's been spoken about is how do you connect redistribution and production at the local level. And that requires a lot of coordination of different types of policies. So that would be my response, maybe not so clear cut. And then Taku, of course, is asking super important questions. I do think is the wanting jobs, not grants, about stigma and targeting. I mean, I think it absolutely is, but I think what Liz and I were trying to do in this work and other is to kind of scratch beneath the surface a little bit on that, because it's kind of too easy to say that grants are associated with dependency and laziness. All of this is true, but I think there's much deeper reasons that we can't discount that are connected to long histories of waged labor, with gender identities, with understandings of citizenship, and that even though stigma is part of understanding the continued attachment to waged work, I think there's more going on, and that's what some of our research is trying to show. And then absolutely, I 100% agree about the point of that, and I think this is just the real debate happening in South Africa now, is more expansive income support, basic income, being viewed as a kind of cost, or is it an investment in human potential and in local economies? And is it an entitlement, you know, a human right, but also an entitlement of the nation's wealth? So that's how I see it, but I think this is really a debate playing out. And I think, again, a lot of the research focuses on the kind of technical questions and not on how these grants are understood. So policymakers can understand it as an entitlement, but someone might still view it as a gift. And so how do you change those perceptions? And I think that takes hard work that I think sometimes doesn't get enough attention. So I guess that's what I'm trying to raise as really important.
Thank you, Dr. Hannah. Let's move to Dr. Isaac, please. You have 2 questions on the floor.
Okay. Thank you. The first question came from Isaac from Botswana, who wanted to know about the percentage of youth unemployment in Zambia. So for the sake of, in the interest of time, I decided not to go so much into detail, but maybe let me first define the word unemployment from the way it is used in Zambia. So unemployment is used as the state of complete joblessness where affected persons are also available for work or actively looking for work. So that is the definition which is provided by the government of Zambia, the state of complete joblessness, which simply means that one is not involved into any socially accepted economic activities that can put some income into their pockets and also in their families. And because of that, they look at people, for example, who are completely not involved in any economic activity to enable them to have any source of income. And on the basis of that, just as I've said, there is no reliable, I think, information, even in my own thinking, even the statistics, which are available, I think, in the government documents, they contradict the studies which have been also done with the people who consider themselves to be unemployed. In statistics, I think from the government of Zambia documents, some of the documents, it is recorded that youth unemployment in Zambia stands at 27.5%. That was, I think, from the labor force survey for 2017. However, the studies which were done by Mukosha in 2020, they indicated that youth unemployment in Zambia stood at 60%. But when it came to the actual, the study which was done by Afrobarometer, this is, I think, in 2014, it was indicated that when they talked to the Zambian youths themselves, those who indicated that they were unemployed, the statistics stood at 80%. I know 2014, that was, I think, long time ago, 7 years down the line, but that is, I think, information which is available. So this is why I said that we do not have reliable information about the actual statistics of youth unemployment. And I was actually struggling even when I've been reading the government of Zambia document, because they've not provided the conceptual definition of really what is employment, what is unemployment, and how, for example, they selected the respondents and so forth. So it's a bit difficult for us to have reliable statistics about the percentage of youths who are unemployed in Zambia. And then the other question came from Dr. Gifty Dafreya, who wanted to know about the skills building. Will they really help it to reduce unemployment, or maybe they are just elusive? I think I've got 4 possible answers to that question. The first answer is that when you look at Zambia, it is argued that one of the main reasons for high levels of youth unemployment is that a number of youths do not have relevant skills. Okay, they do not have relevant skills which can enable them to find employment in the labor market, whether in the formal sector or informal sector. A number of them, they do not have any technical know-how, they do not have any skills. So the idea of giving them the training is to enable them to acquire the skills that can enable them to find employment. And there are 3 major perspectives. If, for example, the youths are given the relevant skills, those who are fortunate, they can find employment in informal market. It's possible even if the government, the mining sector, and any other employers to employ someone, maybe because he's a carpenter, because he's a bricklayer, because he's an engineer, and so forth, they can employ them. The second possible response is that some of these trained youths, they can find employment in the informal sector. So in the informal sector, we have the employers. Okay, maybe someone has got his own workshop or has got his own construction company, and they can employ these youths that have received the skills. And then the third possible answer is that these trained youths, they are able also to work in the informal sector as employees. So they can work as employers and they can also work as employees, meaning that they can still be employed by their colleagues who are already in the informal sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. If you have 3 options, you can choose between the 3. So unfortunately, we are almost out of the time, but I know that we have something on the chat. I don't know how this works. And then we'll move to Mario. Let's see what we have on the chat. Is there a question or is a comment? Please, can someone help me?
I think it's more of a comment.
It's
I can read it if you want.
Okay, okay, please.
It's by someone, I think, Festo. Youth unemployment in the global disaster, and the only way to address youth unemployment is through strengthening entrepreneurship and vocational skills training as provided at all levels, formal and non-formal education. Kind of saying, the solution is skills and entrepreneurship.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So please, Marius, we'll close this session with the question with Marius.
Thank you so much to our two presenters for really two fascinating contributions. I only want to raise one issue, perhaps also in the form of a question to Hannah. It's something that will be taken forward in the next keynote presentation tomorrow. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk the South African Constitution and what it says in fact, in particular in section 27(1)(c). That section, for those of you who are not aware, is part of the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights contains then binding rights in the South African Constitution. It reads as follows. It says that everyone has the right to have access to Social Security, including, if they're unable to support themselves and their dependents, access to appropriate social assistance. So it would appear then that there is indeed an enforceable, and Constitutional Court has made it clear that these rights are indeed enforceable. There is an enforceable right to social security, including then social assistance for everyone. Everyone would indeed include these excluded categories or this particular excluded categories that we are talking about. And just to give you a sense, I'm not sure, Hannah, whether you mentioned the latest Stats South African statistics about youth unemployment in South Africa. If so, I missed it, but those of you would be interested, in the second quarter of 2021, the youth unemployment rate in South Africa rose to 64.4%. It's the highest that it has ever been in the South African history that I know of. Now, of course, it is a difficult question to ask. It's a legal question as well, but certainly a practical one as well. How do you make this right to Social Security, including social assistance, work and operate in such an environment? Of course, it brings up the question around the basic income grant, but also other considerations. Now, I need to point out that the Constitutional Court has kind of adopted a balancing approach. They say that this is really important. You have to look at the monetary side of what government is providing, but you also have to look at the non-monetary side to get a complete picture. It's not the one or the other, it's the one and the other, rather than that. And the Constitutional Court said this in particular in relation to social assistance, non-contributory social security. My question is specifically the following, and it touches on what you mentioned and what Gift also raised. And I was quite interested in the findings that you arrived at and the responses you got. If we were to look at something like works programs, public works programs, and assuming for the moment, and I think you do assume, if I understood your response to Gift's question correctly, that it can, in principle, be seen as a social protection response. What then is wrong with the South African public works programs, and there's more than one, a variant of that, that it does not fulfill this option, or not this option, but this objective, so to say, and so much money, as you said, is going into this, and yet the results are, could we say bluntly, a bit paltry. What is wrong? Is there anything that we can really do to make it really fulfill an appropriate social protection function? Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Anna, we back to you, and please take this moment for your key points that we would like to emphasize. We want to close the session, please.
No, thanks very much, Marius, for raising a number of important issues, and I didn't maybe emphasize enough the constitutional framework and also the state and scale of unemployment, which is so devastating. So thanks for highlighting that. And I mean, I think those questions you're raising are also just this week I was in a conversation with people who are really working with government officials and around the design of policy, real kind of decisions around policy design. And it's exactly these things which are being weighed up, kind of fiscal limits, administrative challenges, and then the constitutional parameters, that you can't justify the exclusion of any group categorically, especially in the context of such widespread poverty and inequality. I don't think there's time to have, and if there's another way for us to continue the conversation around, I don't think on principle you can make I don't have an argument against expanded public works program or community works program being positioned as a way to achieve the right to social security at a kind of abstract level. I can see that it can be understood in that manner. But in my view, from the evidence I have, when we look at how the community works programs have actually operated in particular places, and when you look at their effectiveness and efficiency from a kind of budgetary perspective, it doesn't seem, I find it hard to imagine in practice it would be the best way to realize it. So I see it as part of a package of policy options, but I'm worried that sometimes that becomes, we see this again and again, you know, with the kind of, there's openness now to providing income support to the gap, which has always been there, the 18 to 59-year-olds. And the way in which this is framed as a kind of alternative shuts down that political space, that real possibility for putting income support for that a basic income really on the table. But these are being debated now, I think, really as options, and some of the modeling that I've seen recently is doing this work. But so I'll end it there. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. Some key points that would like to emphasize, please.
Thank you. I think, to me, I've analyzed a number of social protection documents, especially in SADC. There is evidence that there isn't much emphasis on social protection targeted towards youth and employment. And to me, my piece of advice, I think, to all the social protection experts in Africa, especially civil society organizations, that we need to lobby our African governments that if they want to reduce youth unemployment, they should consider, I think, intensifying social protection program towards the youths as the way it is done with older people, with the disabled, and so forth. From my own analysis, I think that this type of social protection is developmental in nature, and it is, I think it has multiple benefits. For example, if the youths are employed, whether it is in formal sector or informal sector, they'll be able to contribute to the growth of the economies in their countries, because the government will be able to tax them, and the revenue from the tax will also go into, I think, supporting the social protection for those people that are not able to work for themselves. So this is something which I would strongly recommend that as SADC and the whole African region, we embark on social protection for the unemployed youths. Thank you.
Thank you for the two speakers, and thank you for taking time to share with us all your presentation. I think we are in the end of the session, and I give back to Susan. Thank you for all.
Thank you, Sergio, for taking us through the last session for today. We have come to the end of day one of the International Annual Conference, and we will be resuming tomorrow. The time for tomorrow, let me just confirm to ensure I'm correct. Okay, so tomorrow we will be starting at 9 hours in the morning, and we will have a second keynote presentation, which Professor Olivier and Dr. Daflea will take us through, just to set the tone of day two. So this is the end of today. We do hope we will have your participation and attention and engagement tomorrow as well. So thank you very much for the virtual participants for being with us throughout the day. For the physical participants, we will break for an hour. That is from 5 to 6. And then at 7 p.m., we will be meeting for a networking dinner. This year is a bit different from the other years. We would like us to be in a relaxed environment. We know we live in times where we just want to relax sometimes. So we dedicated the evening to just networking and engaging with one another. Try and speak to someone you haven't spoken to before. I think someone was asking me why I was sitting with Vince. We're discussing some office matters. So definitely I'll engage with all of you this evening. So do the same. And we are arranging for some music. So if you do have specific preferences, please let us know. But we do expect to see some interesting moves. These moves should be inclusive and responsive to the type of music we're playing and also comprehensive. So let's ensure that we're all in the restaurant by 7 p.m. so that we can start together and we can end the evening together. Yes, sorry. So the dinner will be at 54 where we are staying, and it will be on the same level, but the room is different. It's quite a mouthful. I've forgotten the name, but it starts with K. So there are two rooms. There's the Batha where we had our dinner yesterday, and there's another one further down to the left on the same floor. Okay. Kendridge. Okay, so we'll be having our dinner in the Kendridge. So we'll see you at 7 p.m. If you have any interesting outfits, 7 p.m. Yes, so it's 7 to 9 on the program. Yes. No, it's 2 hours. Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We will now head to the bar, sorry. And for tomorrow, I believe we all know our way here. So we will expect to see you at 9. So just ensure you have breakfast early so that we're all seated by 9, remembering that we have virtual participants that will be waiting for us to start on time. Thank you.